You believe Patrick can see the gorgeous dancer, the love interest, and the face of iconic movies such as Dirty Dancing and Ghost, but behind the emphasis, behind the powerful jawline and that alluring charm, was a man who quietly conducting a bloody conflict. It was something he had never requested, but he dealt with it with unflappable grit. This is the unspoken raw, the account of Patrick Swayze's last hours. He had a harsh diagnosis on how he refused to go away in silence, and the way he held when all else failed, clinging to love, holding on. Let's go over the final, his life's journey, and his parting remarks that continue to reverberate in those he departed. Before the fall, Patrick notices that the world star loved for a long time before headlines. Patrick, you mentioned pancreatic cancer. Swayze was already becoming a legend. He did not come from a wealthy family in Hollywood. However, he exuded the grace of someone who belonged. In front of the Patrick, who was raised in Houston, Texas, was the child of a woman who was a choreographer, and a father who was a cowboy, a blend of elegance and perseverance that would mold his whole identity. In a label-obsessed town, he was difficult to contain. Was he the delicate artist with ballet training and ancient dance? Or was he the tough, prominent American having a Southern in his gaze? He was both steely and drawn, and his breakthrough made him magnetic. In 1987, Dirty Dancing was the turning point. Nobody anticipated a dancing movie with a modest budget to emerge as a phenomenon in culture, but observes Johnny Castle's performance was like a thunderclap. Men desired him, women loved him, teenagers attempted to be him. In swimming pools, lifting one another for decades later, however, he wasn't merely an attractive face and fluid movements. He followed up with a heartfelt message from Ghost. Vocation that required anguish and vulnerability and self-control. The movie turned become one of the biggest revenue of its day and received. He was suddenly nominated for a Golden Globe. Swayze was more than just a box office success. He was demonstrating his seriousness as an emotional. During the late 1980s, the grounded actor, he established a reputation in the early 1990s as the powerful, quiet, and soulful typography. Whether playing point with thrill-seekers' souls that are broken or tortured in the City of Joy, he gave each frame depth, but notoriety never softened him. He had a reputation for his own tricks, to put in a lot of training and to suffer in silence, while Hollywood never shines took the place of the discipline he was given. From the toughness or the dancing studio back in Texas, he picked up this individual fully in charge of his own fate, and that's what caused the subsequent events to devastating. Since the fall occurred, it wasn't a career or tabloid scandal failure, it was a more sinister thing, harsher than anything in Hollywood had hurled at him before, and it arrived silently at first, the end. Diagnoses beginning that rocked Hollywood. It began as discomfort, a slight stomach ache for a person in their mid-50s who oversaw the agony of a physically taxing existence. Was Patrick chalked it up to avoid concern? Digestion problems, stress, or perhaps a pulled muscle, but the discomfort persisted away. In fact, it got much worse. Persistently biting him in the center of the evening, Lisa urged him to look for. Eventually received medical care. The routine scans became urgent, biopsies followed by blood testing, and so on. That everything changed in stage 4. Pancreatic adenocarcinoma is among the most deadly in contemporary medicine. Diagnosis, frequently known as the pancreatic silent killer. Cancer rarely manifests itself until vital organs have already been infiltrated by it. It had already reached Patrick's case. The tumor was blunted by his liver. Doctors was not a type of cancer that could be cured. Wasn't even feasible to handle in the conventional sense. The chances weren't simply thin, they were almost no. Median survival at this time 3 to 6 months is the stage, and many people don't even make it that long. For the majority of people, being diagnosed in this way would have been really devastating, but Patrick, instead of collapsing, the majority of people considering that diagnosis, he looked his physicians in the eye and inquired, "What, will we take any action?" asked his wife. His long-term companion, Lisa Nami, and the nearest confidant was standing next to it. Together, they went to war. They had no intention of seeking miracles. They were searching for days, weeks, and time. Anything they could obtain, such as a clinical study at the Medical Center of Stanford University. Dr. George Fisher gave some hope. Was in charge of a study team evaluating a medication known as vadalinib, a substance intended to prevent the growth of malignancies. In essence, new blood vessels are famished them into submission, but the FDA wasn't approved, but it wasn't a sure thing. But for Patrick, it was something. Something was sufficient for him to fight for. Wanted more time, but he also wanted return of control over his life, and that his passion would keep him going longer than did anyone anticipate. The final major battle Patrick attends January turned into February. Patrick started his experimental vadalinib therapy, and its adverse effects were uncertain, and he was tired and queasy. His body was going into unfamiliar ground, but he never missed. He never showed any hesitation, and in actuality, when questioned about his health, he didn't discuss weariness or discomfort. That's what he told folks, miracle person. April 2, 2008. Patrick went back to Stanford for an examination to determine how his body was reacting, and the outcomes were despite all the odds. He promised his liver some lesions were less severe than others. In terms of metabolism, the pancreas tumor hadn't expanded, and he wasn't even close to being cured, yet he stood battling and temporarily retaining that he got what he needed at that precise moment. Most approval to live once more, and he didn't waste any time. By September, only a few months after the world became aware of his, Patrick signed up to star in the Diagnosis Dark and Difficult, The Beast is a crime drama. That would be filmed in Chicago and need harsh hours, intricate conversations, and scenes that were physically demanding. To say it was to say, a gamble, would be an understatement. Insurance agents were anxious, as were executives. Had inquiries, but Patrick arrived. He refused to have body duplicates every single day. He put every line to memory. This wasn't about image at all. Was about more than just a career. Refusal to acknowledge that he had 5 hours of work left. Filming exhausting 14 to 16 hours every day of the week. Changes, and the moment the camera ceased, he spent his weekends rolling in the hospitalization chemotherapy. The majority of actors would have pulled out. Nobody would have held him accountable. However, Patrick felt that labor was a component of his mental health treatment. Concentration was as crucial as anything entered his intravenous infusion, and in a sense he was correct, since over those months he was once again an actor and not a patient. And he shot every line in every scene. He pushed back against the delivery ticking timer. Pain beyond the curtain, pride mixed with a silent desperation. Patrick Swayze remained the main character on screen. Storm is still sharp and in control, but the actual battle behind the camera was unfolding. He got up each morning with the soldier's discipline, not because he felt strong, but acting strong was the only choice he offered himself. Apply herbal tea to help him swallow his nausea. Applying his own cosmetics with shaking hands, and enter the set as if he were not dying. There was a performance within, however. Cancer is a master of degradation, and it doesn't only target the body, it erodes identity, ego, and esteem for a man such as Patrick, who had cultivated his reputation for a lifetime. Through physical exercise, discipline, and strength, this illness was the most steep. His eyes and hair started to thin, become duller, and moved more slowly. Felt the loss in front of the mirror. Even verified it. Yet he still declined to permit someone to handle him like a patient. Producers recommended changing the filming schedule to suit his chemotherapy weariness, but he vehemently declined. "I'll notify you when I'm unable to complete it." That day never came, he stated, since he never authorized it to. However, the anguish lies behind the pride's gates. continued to move forward later. Friends recalled how he'd occasionally vanish for a few minutes, at a time, passing across scenes, disappearing to throw up or gather his thoughts, and when he always that smile when you return it, always grin and let go. Once more, there was a single instance that revealed the complete truth. If somebody was closely observing sufficient focus, it was during a shooting, during a break-in, when he was discovered by a long-time buddy bent over in his like a child, the trailer curled up. Sweat was dripping from his garments, was trembling violently, yet his voice. "Just hold my hand," he whispered quietly. He wasn't pleading for assistance. Bursting into tears, he only wanted someone to be present, but not as a fan or a fixer. This was Patrick, the just there. Never before had the world witnessed the guy who potentially attract millions of viewers. Although at that time just had to be held, and when the performance came to an end and the cancer stepped as the spotlight lowered, moving forward with greater aggression and tenacity, the masked slips were far from finished. Patrick's declining well-being with the wrapped and released into the world, the beast Patrick could no longer conceal, not from the general public rather than the media, and definitely not from the January 2009 was a pivotal month for cancer. Moment not only in his well-being but also in his reality. Not long after completing the Patrick was taken to Cedars-Sinai in a hurry. Hospitalized with a case of pneumonia. For others, pneumonia could indicate a lengthy week spent in bed, but for one receiving chemotherapy, whose immune system had been destroyed, it might indicate death. The sickness compelled everyone to pay attention. Up until now, Patrick had kept the worst of his fight at bay. Off the main page, but pictures taken by paparazzi of his emaciated physique, his shrinking the oxygen tube and cheeks showed the truth. The illness was still winning. As his strength diminished and his lungs failed, Patrick persisted in talking about next. Taking no action wasn't in his language that his physicians suggested something extreme, an unproven combination of GMSAR2 and Abraxane, strong chemotherapeutic medications that are not yet commonly approved simultaneously. It was dangerous there. We're worried about the adverse effects of poisoning, impacts and overall efficiency. But Patrick didn't. He gave the go-ahead without hesitation. The cruelty of the treatment caused him to start losing something that struck his hair more forcefully. Patrick had more than most people would have thought. He always carried himself with pride. Presence. His hair loss wasn't simply cosmetic, it served as a reminder and a symbol that the conflict wasn't even close. No longer to maintain his honor, he wore wigs in public. He worked on his smile. Even though he is uncomfortable, his weight fell suddenly, his skin turned pale, and even when going short distances, the sunken grew tiresome. However, despite the haze of exhaustion and despite his sickness, he attempted to live his life. Watched movies, rode horses, and did discussions on his possible future duties, but his body was different. No longer collaborating with those closest to him, noticed the little slowing of the speech. The way he glanced off in uncertainty. His malignancy is occasionally not entirely visible. Wasn't limited to his liver or pancreatic. No more, it was all over his body. His temple was becoming a battleground. Patrick made the decision, since it was losing ground. A choice. It was time to leave. The last hideaway home, where horses and Patrick faced the harsh reality in April 2009. Leaves the turmoil of Hollywood behind and the icy accuracy of medical facilities. He went back to California with Lisa. Ranch, a vast area of property tucked away. The ranch was surrounded by hills and horses. Patrick's favorite spot to relax was. The world became quiet, and life began to feel once more. He didn't refer to it as giving up. He referred to it as returning to the important things. The ranch had served as a haven for many years. Long rides over the grasslands for them, evenings spent on the veranda observing the sound of hooves on dirt at sunset was their approach to Patrick's treatment. It was him, and it was more than simply home. but his once athletic life had altered. Chemotherapy has reduced the frame. Even his muscles had melted into weakness. It now needed effort to mount a horse. He would occasionally just stand by the fence. Lisa chose to watch them instead. Everything was managed, and the property was cooked. His food and his prescription drugs, and remained awake all night long when she felt pain as she observed the man she'd loved gradually since they were teenagers vanish before her, and still she never gave him the impression that he was Patrick, who was dying, held on to a feeling of as long as he could, he wore it normally. Those who saw his wig grinned, for he sat up straight even for the occasional picture. When he wanted to pass out, he still made an attempt at jokes, dry humor mixed with snark as usual, yet his enthusiasm was rapidly declining, and the media weren't far behind the paparazzi. Themselves close to the property in the hopes of Patrick's uncensored money shot undone in the end, they received an A series. Several pictures showed Patrick moving slowly, with Lisa's eyes sunken and skeletal, appearing to be decades older than his own age of 57. The headlines were dehumanizing. The endearing observes wasting away, but what they were unable to catch was the closeness behind closed doors, the late-night discussions, the little triumphs such as rising from his bed on his own, or the silent times when Lisa simply sat next to him, holding his hand, saying nothing. At this stage, there were no words no longer required. Patrick was worn out, and he knew in his heart what was about to happen. The storm that he had managed to avoid for 20 months was at his door at last, the day he finally let go. Hours by the end of August, Patrick's health declined significantly. The indications were identifiable: protracted fevers, uncontrollable shaking, and intense exhaustion. One day, he passed out with a high fever and an alarmingly high heart rate. The cooling was discovered by blood work. Reality: elevated calcium levels, gastrointestinal hemorrhage due to hyponatremia. Hardly any white blood cells departed from his. The body wasn't simply becoming weaker. It was. Lisa shut him down and hurried him to Cedar, returning to Sinai, but this time there were no fresh difficulties or fresh hope. On September 9th, physicians provided them with the "There's something that no one wants to hear. We are unable to do." Patrick came home that evening. For the last time, the circumstances that led to Lisa disclosed them prior to his passing. In an interview from 2011, she allegedly stated, "This cannot be kept a secret. No longer." Here's what Lisa says occurred during Patrick's last days. The air was heavy, the house was quiet, and the man who had previously danced over movie sets and stages currently spent the majority of his time spent in bed, not able to move. His bones had been affected by the malignancies. His organs and nerves were in pain. Unrelenting morphine had stopped optional, but it was essential to simply maintain. Lisa became his nurse while he was conscious. She gently administered Dilaudid, changing dosages in an attempt to lessen the suffering without taking away his consciousness. Patrick stubbornly refused to be sedated till the very end. He desired to be for as long as he could present, even at the cost of going through hell. Lisa's brother then passed away on September 11th. Eric and Mary, his spouse, paid a visit to the home was dark, and Patrick's vitality was muted. Was coming and going, but for one brief moment when clarity came back he turned to Lisa, his tone just a little bit higher than Lisa leaned forward and said, "I love you." They were unaware of it at the time, but that would be the last thing they spoke. Dramatic, nor poetic, but just sincere and truthful. In the 2 days that followed, Patrick slipped. His respiration grew shallow as he entered a coma. His already frail body became more motionless every hour, and then at 10 a.m. Lisa sat next to him on September 14th and observed the shift, took a big breath, and long, last breath, and then quiet down. He rushes in the hopes of anything at all, but it was over. Though he didn't go, Patrick sees was gone. He departed precisely, alone or without love. The way he had bravely lived with dignity, and was someone preserving his hand following the quiet. There were whispers of anguish and devotion on trial in the days after Patrick Swayze's passing. The quiet surrounding the property was profound, and the horses were still. The air blew through the fields, still mumbled in the trees, but there was nothing but absence within the house. Lisa recently lost her 34-year-old partner. Years was abruptly encircled by tranquility, but through sound, and not the sound of. Despite the speculations, it didn't take which the tabloids would move in a number of items that appeared on gossip websites such as Radar Online that are full with allegations that Patrick had been mistreated by Lisa in his last months. Unnamed sources alleged emotional abuse or neglect. They depicted a woman in their painting who he was isolated by others who refused to give him medicine, and who was in charge of his storied death was unsightly, dramatic, and based on those who were they, in fact, total fiction? Family and friends visited Lisa's defense in a timely and forceful manner. Medical documents examined by impartial specialists such as Dr. Richard Hunter displayed a whole different narrative. The degree of Patrick's treatment was not just it was consistent. Remarkable. Each spike in anguish was all complications were handled. Each doctor's appointment was carefully afterward. When Dr. Hunter viewed Patrick's firsthand, publicly available records revealed that there was not the slightest indication of abuse or disregard. He even said that Patrick's prolonged survival for 20 months after there would have been no way to diagnose without constant, committed attention, and that is just what Lisa gave others who were near Patrick at the time. Lisa was referred to in his dying months as his angel of protection. She prepared and monitored each dose in coordination with physicians and remained up all night. When he could no longer bear the ache, sleep, although as frequently occurs in the public reaction to celebrity deaths, the body does not end speculation. A void exists that encourages conspiracy theories. And when there is a small scandal about the truth, tendency to be more vocal. But those who were aware of it never faltered in their backing of Lisa. Donnie visits with close friends and medical personnel, and even Patrick's previous co-workers mirrored Patrick's sentiment. The last chapter wasn't one of treachery, but of steadfast affection and love as he had demonstrated in life and death what mattered. The main reason he lived for so long. When Patrick is initially diagnosed with cancer, his oncologists even prepared for the worst, pancreatic cancer in stage 4, in particular once it has already spread to the, according to doctors, liver, is a death sentence. Requirements a lot of people barely make it to, if they're lucky, 3 months 6. Patrick lived for 20 years, so what changed? Dr. Richard Hunter and others claim that experts, it was not just the clinical trial or the experimental medications, even though those undoubtedly contributed to what prolonged his life, was a result of 3 strong influences that the majority of patients don't have. The first one, together. Patrick's physical state was not unfamiliar with suffering or perseverance, as he was a former